the Cypriot Parliament to act.
Eurogroup chief Jeroen Dijsselbloem is under fire from fellow EU officials over comments he made about the Cyprus bailout deal. The Dutch finance minister, in the job for just 2 months, is already facing criticism for his handling of the Cypriot case. He gave an interview on Monday describing Nicosia's bailout as a model for U-turning hours later. A European Commission spokeswoman said, "We think that the right solution has been found for this specific Cypriot case. That doesn't mean that it's a perfect model that should be reused in the future." Deposits of less than €100,000 will be guaranteed by the EU. But depositors with sums greater than that could see 40% of their savings converted into shares of 2 sick Cypriot banks.
The Eurogroup was at the receiving end of instructions which came from high up. It had to wait for a long time for these instructions, and under these difficult conditions, I think a pretty good job was done.
We're joined now by Alekos Michailidis, Professor of Finance at the University of Cyprus, and a close aide of President Anastasiades during the negotiations which resulted in the bailout for Cyprus. The final agreement was made at the highest level, leaving the Eurogroup to rubber stamp it. Do you think that Europe has failed to manage the crisis of Cyprus, which resulted in a much tougher solution? The whole crisis began with the haircut of Greek debt, which led the banks into a lot of trouble. Last week we had the decision on the Cypriot haircut, which shut the banking system for 1 week. But yesterday we had an agreement that we hope will get us out of this crisis. The German finance minister said that Cyprus hasn't completely avoided bankruptcy. Do you think that there is a kind of pressure so they can ask for further measures in the future? I agree with that view. Things are difficult because we have to limit the bank run threat first, and there's also going to be a downturn in GDP, and therefore an increase in the debt to GDP ratio. So we have to see how the government will deal with this economic situation over the next few months. Do you believe Europe punished Cyprus for saying no first to the agreement? On the one hand, yes, because this solution is much tougher than the previous one that was on the table. There's the difficult issue of the transfer of Laiki Bank's debt to the Bank of Cyprus, and that's why many people are upset. Will any bankers lose their jobs? Some will, because Laiki will be split into a good and bad bank. When will there be a decision on bank deposits? It's not been decided yet. There are ongoing negotiations. We might know next week. Dijsselbloem said that this solution may be used for other countries. Do you think Cyprus may be an experiment for EU officials? This word may be a hard word, but it's logical. When a bank loses money, some are always going to get punished. First the shareholders, then the bondholders, and now the depositors. But it's important that depositors with less than €100,000 are protected. The banks reopen on Thursday, in theory. What's going to happen? What's the government's plan to avoid a bank run? This is something that remains under discussion, so there's nothing to announce yet. But I think it should be clear what each of us could do when the banks are open again.
Μάλιστα. Κύριε Μιχαηλίδη, σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Και εγώ ευχαριστώ.